Hi, I'm Dr. Evelyn Lockhart. I'm a board-certified pathologist and a blood banker, and you may have seen my video on how to make blood. Here at Contrast Creative, we wanted to demonstrate some other techniques in moulage, or using makeup to simulate injury. Now this can be used in something as fun as entertaining as Halloween, or in simulation at your healthcare center to help provide education and training. Now, our lovely model today, Grayson, has kindly volunteered her arm to us so we can show how to use just easy to find makeup to simulate a bruise on her arm. Now, the makeup I'm using is really the cheap Halloween makeup you can probably pick up at a drugstore or at a Halloween store near you, so this should be easily accessible to everyone. One thing I wanted to point out, which is a useful set of colors, you may see something called a bruise wheel. This tends to have darker colors like a deeper brick-colored maroon, this mustard yellow. Maroons, yellows, purples, and greens are going to be really useful in you creating a realistic bruise. So, if you want to come close. So, what we're going to be simulating today is an injury that might have occurred had Grayson unfortunately gotten in the way of a baseball. So, when you're looking at impact injuries, the injury itself and what you understand about how that injury occurs is going to help you create a very realistic bruise. When a ball hits or an object hits, it's going to damage the tissue, release blood into the surrounding skin, but it's going to leave this sort of central clear spot that shows the site of impact. Something that might help you with this too is if you happen to have any pictures that you can find on the internet. In this case, we found some, thanks to Google search, they're going to help serve as our point of inspiration. We're probably going to make a bruise about this big, and some other tools you're going to need to put this together. You can use some cheap paint brushes, hobby brushes that you pick up at a craft store. If you can find some of these foam latex sponges that are used for just regular women's cosmetics in a drugstore, that helps too. We're also going to be using a special setting powder that helps set the grease paint. All this is grease-based, and if you don't use a powder at the end to set it, it's going to smear and it's going to look kind of shiny and not real. You can also use talcum powder at the end of this. And of course, before you use any makeup on a subject, ideally you'd like to have the chance to test it and make sure they're not going to have an allergic reaction to it. So for this makeup, we're going to start out with a base, and I had set, it also helps to set aside some dabs of this makeup in either a flat dish or some kind of cheap palette, so you can do a little bit of mixing and adjusting of the colors without contaminating the rest of your colors. So we're going to start off with this base of mustard yellow. And you might, if you saw my video in making blood, you might remember me saying that a little goes a long way, and it's always easier to add more. It's very tough to take away. The same thing goes doubly here. It's easier to layer these colors and add depth and texture to this rather than have to fix it when you've smeared it on too heavily. So this yellow color that we're putting on is just lightly dabbed on. You're going to hear me talking about dabbing. You can use the tip of your finger to sort of dab and spread that color. And this is going to form sort of that central impact site of where the fictional ball hit poor Grayson. So it's not a big color difference, but just a little bit. And sort of spread it out with the concentration of the pigment right here. After putting on that light little central circle of yellow, the next thing we're going to do is start to build up some of the reds. Now, what you can also see with bruises is as they age from going fresh to older, you might remember that earlier on they have more reds and purples in them, and as they get older they're going to get a little bit more yellow and green tones to it. So this one is sort of a middle-aged bruise. There still is going to be some of that fresh red-purple blood we're seeing underneath the surface. And what you can see here too is this maroon color that I'm picking up. If you have a red that isn't quite the right shade, you can mix it with a little bit of green to tone it down, maybe a little bit of black. Just mix a basic primary colors you have here and get a color that's going to work for you. It also helps to tap off the brush on the back of your hand so you're not loading too much paint onto the surface. So for this we're going to start to dab around here, and you want to try and get some of these brush strokes a little uneven, and you're just tapping. Now the nice thing about Bruises that's helpful for doing this as a beginner, as well as creating a more realistic bruise, is that bruises are splotchy. They're not supposed to be even, so you don't want an even shade. You like that splotchiness to it, and you can use your fingers to help build that. Put down that light color first, that light layer first, rather. You can see. You don't want to see any hard brush strokes or anything like that, so if you can, tap it out with your finger, or if you want, you can also use a sponge to tap it out too. So what we're trying to do is get a little bit more darker color on this side of the bruise here. Again, the red is a nice base. The red represents sort of lighter amounts of blood spill, but as you can see, as it builds up, it starts to take on, even just this maroon color, it starts to take on a little bit more of a purplish tone to it. You want to make sure too to carefully feather the edges so it smooths out and there's no hard edges around there at all. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to pick up a little bit of this purple color. And again, if the purple is a little too bright, you can mix it with some of the red. But this purple is nice because it has just a little bit of gray to it, and that's going to help really give that sort of deep, sort of bloody look to it. And you can see here that we're kind of spreading out. Up here it's lighter, down here it looks a little bit heavier. Like this got sort of the impact like this. And always take a moment to step back and look at what you're doing, because if you get too close, you might lose the forest for the trees. And light layers. Tapping it out to blend. That's starting to look pretty good. You want to take it deeper along this edge here. So slowly layer on, and you can even layer on a little bit of that red in here to deepen that. All right, so that's looking pretty good at this point. Now, in order to make this look even more realistic, you can add a little texture to this. So one thing I like to do is take a very fine paintbrush and you take some of this red, some of that red, and if you come in here to this light area, very lightly put just tiny little dots in there. That looks like broken blood vessels. Not too much. And tap it out. But it just gives that look that there's been tiny little ruptured vessels here. And you can also take some more of your yellow and use a technique called stippling. And this is a stipple sponge. You can get this, again, in Halloween stores, makeups, or even maybe some craft stores. And if you take some of these colors and mix them up like this, just load a little bit onto the stipple sponge. That will add a little bit of texture in. And keeps it from looking too flat and unrealistic. All right, so at this point what you want to do is set the makeup. And for this, you can either use your foam latex sponge. I took a little bit of this setting powder and just loading a little bit of that onto this latex sponge. These tend to be a little bit more manageable than working with big puffs. You could work with big puffs like this, small cotton pads like this, blow off a little excess, and lightly tap onto there. And then any excess you can brush off with just facial puff like this. And there you have a bruised arm. Sorry. But thank you very much for watching. This is Dr. Evelyn Lockhart at Contrast Creative.